They told me I was welcome here. They told me I had a home. They told me they loved me. They didn't tell me everything.
Hi.
Hi, Nina. I just have
How
to
are
say,
you?
I loved that little book trailer that just ran, and I
That
loved
was
your
a
book.
surprise.
It
I
just
had no
teared me
idea
up.
that
I
was
know.
oh.
I highly recommend Nina's book. How are you doing today?
I'm doing well. How are you, Sarah?
Good. It's funny because
Hey.
we're only like 15 miles apart, but
I know.
here we are.
This is the best we can do right now.
Yes, this is actually the most technologically advanced thing I have done this whole since, pandemic time. And
Yeah.
shout out to Ben, who helped us with some technical issues right before we started. A little bit of a
Yes.
nail biter.
Yes. Yes. We worked it out.
I'm Sara Zarr.
Sarah,
And
tell everybody. I'm such a huge fan of you, Sarah, and please,
thank you.
tell everybody about your work, and then I will gush about you.
Well, thank you. I'm Sara Zarr. I'm the author of 7 novels for young adults. Ooh, a hot beverage. That was a good idea. 7 novels for young adults and 1 nonfiction book. I had 2 books come out during pandemic times. One came out back in April called Goodbye from Nowhere, and it is a very California book, which I've always wanted to write one. Big epic family story set in California. And yours is also a California book, which I love. And then my nonfiction book that came out this year is called Courageous Creativity, Advice and Encouragement for the Creative Life. And it's just kind of a fun, short, very designy book of, encouragement, basically, and advice and a few writing exercises and things like that, which we'll talk about a little more later. But that's what I'm all about. And all my stories are realism set on the time space continuum as you know it. Yours usually are. Tell
Wait.
the people about you and your work.
Yeah. Well, first of all, I love your work so much. And I haven't read Goodbye from Nowhere yet, but it's the only one of your novels that I haven't yet read. And I'm saving it for when I finish this revision. And I know I'm going to love it. Gem and Dixie, your last novel, was I read it on an airplane and sobbed my way through it. It's so beautiful. And the way that Sarah writes about relationships and loneliness and like the inner longings of her characters are some of my favorite things. So I'm such a huge admirer and so glad to be here talking to you. And also, this book is so good. I've been enjoying. Wait, I have to get used to the camera. I've been enjoying it so much, and it's so welcoming and approachable and demystifying about writing and creativity. And I love it. So I'm glad that we get to talk about it a little bit today. Yeah. So my most recent book is Watch Over Me, which is about a teenager on a farm, but I won't give too much away because we're going to be talking about all of the different sources of inspiration behind our latest work during this session. So, well, I don't know, or maybe I should just dive into the sources of inspiration for it.
I mean, why don't you talk a little bit about, people saw the trailer for the book, which is very moody. And the topic of this session is inspiration and originality, and kind of how existing work inspires and informs our own writing. And every writer I know is, pulling in influences and inspiration all the time, and kind of how you take something that you're inspired by, informed by, impressed by, or even like aggravated by, and bring it into your own imagination, I guess, and come out with something that is uniquely yours. So what were some of those influences for you for Watch Over Me?
Yeah, so my book before Watch Over Me is We Are Okay. And that book was one that came like from this incredible personal place, and probably was the book that I drew the least on sources of like artistic sources of inspiration for. Like it just kind of poured out of me from my own like experience, a fictionalized, very fictionalized version of my own experiences at the time. And after that book, I didn't have like a new pressing idea, and I found myself needing to look outward and kind of embrace sources of inspiration in order to come up with a new idea that would excite me after writing a book that felt so deeply personal to me. And so I have always wanted to attempt a retelling of a story. I love the idea of starting with a structure in place, or at least with some of the key elements. It feels so comforting, right? To like have something to help guide you through this process. And so I searched my mind for different books that I have read over the years and loved. And I used to teach high school English, and one of the electives that I taught was Gothic literature. And I have been so steeped in realism for so long that I wanted to try something new. You know, I had written several novels, and I was kind of itching for a new challenge. And so I wanted to write something with ghosts. And I ended up with The Turn of the Screw by Henry James as being the text that I thought I would help guide me to find what this story would be. And what I was really drawn to in The Turn of the Screw is one, how well it would cross over to a young adult work, because it's about a young governess who goes to take care of children. And I thought, oh, that would be so easy in a YA setting. I could just make her, newly out of high school. I could have her then accept an internship or something, a job, and go to this remote place. And the other thing that I liked about Turn of the Screw as a source of inspiration was that it was multi-generational. And I felt that I had been working so closely like with just teenagers as my central characters. And I was really ready to invite people of other ages into my core cast. And so since the governess in The Turn of the Screw takes care of children, I thought, okay, I can have young children in this, and I can have the adults who run this farm where my character will end up. And so I took all of these different aspects of The Turn of the Screw, and I initially thought that I would do a more direct retelling of it. But there are elements of The Turn of the Screw that I just didn't want to use. And the more that I thought about my characters and got to know them, especially my main character, Mila, and realized what haunted her from her past, I realized that it was going to be a very different story. So then I kind of let that initial inspiration fall to the side. And I was able to create my own thing, right? That's where the originality part of it comes. Like,
right.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, Turn of the Screw is an interesting case because I don't want to go off on a tangent about it, but it's very opaque. Like you don't really know what happened. By the end, you read the end of that book and you're like, what now? What happened? And there's a lot of interpretations you can put on it. And it's not clear like who's good and who's bad. And I like how you brought that uncertainty of the who might be good and who might be bad into the story. Or good and bad is such a simplified way of saying it, but like a malevolent force or a benign or positive force. But you don't leave at the end. I wasn't going like, I don't understand what just happened, which was you one-upped Henry James on that one.
Thank you. Thank you.
Go ahead.
Okay. Well, tell me about Goodbye from Nowhere, or any of the other of your novels that you want to talk about the sources of inspiration for. I'd love to hear.
I'm going to ignore the fact that my ring light just died. So here I am in my natural light. For Goodbye from Nowhere is funny. In 2015 and 2016, I had read two novels that I really loved. One was The Turner House by Angela Flournoy, which is a great book. And another was Commonwealth by Anne Patchett. And they both are like big multi-generational family stories told from a lot of points of view. So initially I thought, and I also was really into the TV show This Is Us at the time. I think it had just recently started. And I love the idea of a big, complicated, like ultimately loving but messy family with a lot of points of view. And so when I thought about, like, how do I make this into a YA novel? That's sort of my thing right now. I thought about cousins. And this had also overlapped with, I was at a writing retreat and I was talking to a friend who lives on kind of a farmish area in California. And she was telling me about this cousin camp she does with her grandkids every summer, where they come and do things on the farm. And I immediately, because I like family drama, I was like, what if they were teenagers? And what if like something bad was happening in one of the families that no one wanted to talk about? And I remember I was telling this out loud to my friend, and she's like, Sarah, that's so depressing. Like, no, it's wonderful and dramatic.
Yes.
So, but like you were saying how some of the initial inspiration fell away in the process of writing. Similarly, for me, when I wrote the first draft of this, it was from nine points of view. They're like 9 cousins, and they all got a turn telling the story, and it just was not going anywhere. Like I could not get the story moving forward, and it was too many stories to try and tell at once. So then it was down to 2, and then the final result, it's just a single point of view. So it didn't end up looking anything like The Turner House or Commonwealth or This Is Us, but I think all of that thinking that I did about the other characters is there in the background in ways that you can't necessarily see in the end result.
Can I ask you a question about that? I'm so curious, like, how did you find out, like, how did you make that decision when you had to cut those initial 7 and go down to 2? Like, was it like 2 were just so clearly the ones you should focus on? Or, I mean, how?
Yeah. Part of it was, you know how it is, you have conversations with your editor, and that helps you laser in, but it always was kind of 2 of the cousins, Kyle and Emily, who were like kind of best friend cousins, but they live in different towns, so it's like a text-based relationship and see each other every summer. So then it would, and my editor helped me see too, this story about Kyle and Emily and other stuff that's going on in their lives. And then Emily had a whole, like, I could still write a whole book about Emily if I wanted to, because she had a whole story that ended up just getting dropped. But it just became evident that it was going to be Kyle's story. And also I had never written a book yet from a male character's main point of view. And I was really interested in doing that. And I think it just excited me more to write his chapters, and you could feel that in the writing. So that's how that ended up. I was curious about when we talked about this topic, you said that I don't know if it was for Watch Over Me or another one of your books, but you had like thought about Mary Shelley's Frankenstein as also an inspiration, and then you tried it and it didn't. What was the deal with Frankenstein?
Yeah. So Frankenstein is another one of those books that I taught in my Gothic literature class, and I loved teaching it. I love that book. And one of the things that I am so drawn to about it is its structure and how it's a frame narrative. So how it begins, and Frankenstein's actually, I think, like a double frame, but a frame narrative, for the listeners being like that it begins with one story and then it opens itself up to a different point of view and a different story in the middle, and then it returns to the original story. And I thought that would be a really good way to structure Watch Over Me, because I'm telling 2 stories at once in that book.
Right. The timeline.
Yeah. So there's the present story of this young woman who arrives on this farm and finds that there are ghosts there and it's haunted, and she doesn't know if she should be there, and she doesn't know if she belongs, and she feels like an outsider, and she's making all of these new connections. But then there's also the story of her past and what happened to her about 4 years ago over the course of a year. And that's a story with a very different source of inspiration. That's a real life source of inspiration where in my old house, out my kitchen window, I looked onto a property that's much like Blake's property in the book. It's a plot of land that this man bought intending to buy a house, but he ran out of money. And so he never built the actual house, but it has all of these like makeshift structures on it, and people would come and go. And I would wash dishes and look out the window and watch that unfolding. And so the past sections of the book have to do with that. And I love this frame structure. And I thought, okay, like I'll start with her going to this farm, and then and we'll know that she has this dark past and that we don't know what has happened yet. And then we'll flash in the center of the book, just like in Frankenstein, I'll tell the whole story of what happened. And then I'll go back to the present for the rest of the book. And I kept trying to make it work. And that's part of why I asked you, like, how did you come to the point where you knew you had to cut those characters? Because I really wanted it to work. Because I just love the structure, but it didn't fit with the story. Like we needed to get it piece by piece. And so I finally had to dismantle that. And so that's an example of failed inspiration. I was intending one thing, and then.
Do you like tuck that away and think maybe in a future book project, I will be able to revisit this structure that I love and maybe employ it in a different story?
I do. Yeah. I mean, for We Are Okay, I really wanted there to be ghosts. Like I thought that the character of Gramps, I thought he might be a ghost that haunts me, haunts Marin, that character. And then it just like really didn't fit in that book. And so very early on, I knew that was not going to happen. But I filed away that idea of ghosts. And so then when it was time to write my next one, I thought I'm going to find a book, some source material with ghosts and see how it's done and try that out.
I like what you were just saying about earlier about when you were done with We Are Okay and you were like, what am I going to write next? And you intentionally kind of thought about what is it that you like. I think a lot of writers, I know I used to think this too when I was starting out, that inspiration would just happen, like story ideas would just like fall from the sky into my brain. And sometimes it can, but I think like you can intentionally use what inspires you to generate story ideas, like you did for Watch Over Me. And like Frankenstein itself was like a generated story. For people that don't know, like Mary Shelley, this is the apocryphal story anyway, was like on a retreat weekend or weeks or whatever with some other writers, and they sort of challenged each other, like who can write the scariest monster story. So I mean, that was clearly like not an inspiration that just fell from the sky. It was generated. Right. And I know you had put something in our notes about the Disenchantments also, which is another previous book of yours.
Yeah. I mean, one of the things that I wanted to talk about with Sarah's wonderful new book here is that, you bring up this idea of having an attention collection, which I love so much. And just like so much of the other things in this book, it really opens up. This book is so inviting and it's so reassuring to people that like we all have these already. We all have these collections of things that we pay attention to. And the trick is just to notice them and be conscious of them. And I also really like how you talk about, being aware of what we give our attention to and then being aware of how it makes us feel. And I've been doing that a little bit lately. Just because I've noticed, like I'm in the midst of doing this intense revision right now. And so I noticed that I would be like working really hard on the revision. And then my break would be like scrolling through social media, which is so draining, it's so draining. And you even use that as an example in the book, how it usually ends with like bad feelings or not helpful feelings. But I'm also taking this class to learn how to play the ukulele. And so I've noticed like if I take a break from my writing and then I pick up the ukulele and practice that instead of scrolling, I feel energized. Like if I pay attention to that, that interest of mine, like I I also notice that I feel really good and then ready to get back to other work. So I just love this concept in the book so much. And it made me think about my past books and like how if you read my book, The Disenchantment or Everything Leads to You, and made a list of all the things that are discussed in that book, the way that Sara does in Courageous Creativity, like you could find my attention collection like in reverse by doing it that way. So like for The Disenchantment, it would be road trips and like little music shows, like little house, show performances or small concert venues and girl bands. And Everything Leads to You is filmmaking in Los Angeles and classic movies. And so, finding these things that we really love and putting them into our novels and even forming our novels around these things, I think can be just so good for the creative process, and such a wonderful way to connect to like what we're inherently passionate about.
Right. It's like it's both like what happens organically when you like something, but then if you're thinking like a writer, it's also becomes intentional. So to sort of the way that when you're reading a book and you're a writer, you are one level reading it as a reader and just enjoying the story. But a part of you, like your little writer brain, is like, oh, how did they do that? Or I don't like the way they did this. Or I see that I do this thing in my books and it doesn't really serve the story. And how can I do that? There's a lot more intention that goes into learning to write maybe than we really realize. Like apart from, I mean, you and I have both taught and teach for MFA programs. There's formal learning, of course, but when you embark on your own writing journey, you can create a lot of intention without having a curriculum or a MFA or anything. You can create a lot of intention around how you learn to write. And part of that is that idea of notice what you notice. Like, what do I notice in the world that I'm drawn to, or like what repels me, or what am I curious about? Because that can help inform and shape the kind of stories that we want to write. And I mean, you can be as intentional as like put it in a journal, jot things down in your notes app in your phone, or it might just be something that just stews like in your like semi subconscious part of your mind. You could also think of it as like an inspiration collection. Like, what are the things that inspire me? There's a quote that I put at the top of our document, and I can't remember who said it. I want to say Flannery O'Connor, but I don't know for sure. But the quote that sticks in my head is, the only adequate response to a work of art is another work of art. So I think noticing the things that like make you want to write. Like when I was reading your book, Mina, Watch Over Me, which I did last week, it was a really stormy day, which was perfect for this book. It made me, there was one point I put down the book, and there's something I've been working on that's my own retelling of something, and I've been writing it in third person forever, and Watch Over Me is in first person. And I just thought, I think I need to do this other thing in first person to like bring out some other, to like make it work and really make it connect. But at the same time, I was just enjoying your book. So there's just a constant, once you get in that mindset of like, everything I read and watch and like take in can help teach me how to write. And like what you were saying about like just like scrolling through news or Twitter, I've never walked away from social media and felt like, I'm glad I spent that half hour just like reading everyone's opinion about something. Like it just doesn't work that way. I mean, it can give a certain kind of energy that can be enjoyable in a way, but it doesn't feed my creative process, which is what I'm always looking for. But there are like, there's all these subconscious things floating around in our brain. Like my very first book, Story of a Girl, I was working on it in a writer's group. And someone in the writer's group said, oh, this part of the story reminds me of Member of the Wedding by Carson McCullers. And I was like, oh my God, I love Member of the Wedding by Carson McCullers. I didn't even notice I was doing that, but I love that story, which a key part of that story is this young character is just like obsessed with her brother and his girlfriend and how they're all going to be a family together at some point. So that helps me really like focus in on that aspect of Story of a Girl. And that's really what made the book in the end became the most important element of the story.
I love
anyway,
that
I know
so
we're going to go to Q&A soon. Thank you. I'm going to look at the Q&A document and see if we like have a ton of stuff that we need
we do. I'm seeing
make
it here.
extra
It's
time
very
for.
exciting. Yeah, we have a lot. Is there anything you want to cover? Or should we just jump in? Okay. All right. Let's see. So how do you know if your writing is yours and not an unconscious imitation of someone else? To what extent is it okay for writing to imitate others? I was thinking about this question just this morning. And let's see, Sarah, I've lost you. Can you still see me?
Oh yeah, I can see you.
Okay. Something happened.
And you're happening. As far as I know, you're happening.
All right. Well, great. I can't see us anymore, but all right. I was just thinking this morning. So last night I watched the new Miranda July movie, Kajillionaire.
Oh yeah.
And and then this morning I was listening to an interview with her. And I had this memory of when her book of short stories came out, just reading it and loving it so much. And I was still really forming my voice as a writer. I think I was in grad school maybe at the time. And I remember writing a short story after reading her collection of stories and feeling like I really loved it. But then reading it like a year later and realizing that I had just completely ripped off a Miranda July story, like not intentionally, but also sort of intentionally, because I had been just studying her work so much and loving her voice. Right. And that's a story that I know, like I'm so glad I never sent that story out to be published or anything like that, because I just would feel so awful. Like it felt way too close. Whereas like there are other writers who I studied a lot. When I was in high school, I discovered Raymond Carver short stories, and his style really influenced my style of writing. And that's something that like I just I don't feel like I'm a Raymond Carver ripoff or anything. I just feel like I learned how to write sparely from studying someone who wrote spare.
I think it's a natural progression of learning how to write, is to start by basically imitating something that you love or trying to emulate it or replicate it in some way. I know when I started out, I was like, I want to write a Robert Cormier book. And eventually I found my own voice. But I think imitation is a natural part of learning. And like visual artists, they literally learn by taking their sketchbook to a museum and copying the master. So, where it becomes a problem is if then you go seek publication and you've unintentionally kind of verbatim, which has happened. We've seen a couple times over the last like 20 years, those stories of people who it appears like some kind of intentional plagiarism. They say it wasn't, but a voice of another writer was so embedded in their consciousness, and they didn't know that they were doing it, and it's hard to know the real story. But I mean, it's natural to imitate. All you can do is, before you seek publication, just do everything you can to make sure it's yours. And you don't want to literally have like someone else's book open on your desk while you're writing and just accidentally like write something that's just like them. But there are, I mean, there's a lot of books that, that are like read-alikes, where something is in a similar style as something else, and that's fine. That's like, there's lots of styles out there that get replicated and then get their own twist on it. This might be a bad analogy if you've never been on TikTok, but for those of you who are on TikTok at all or look at it, this is a big thing on TikTok. I mean, one of the whole points of it is you're taking someone else's audio usually, or a meme idea or a joke, and they get replicated and replicated. And when you're looking at TikTok, the difference between this is just like an imitation of this meme I saw someone else do, and then comparing it to one that's like, this is such a funny original twist on the meme that now makes it a new joke. Yeah. So I mean, that's different than writing a 75,000 word novel, but that's, I don't know. it can be nerve-wracking when you're starting out to just feel like, did I copy someone? I don't know. Just do your best to make sure it's coming from you.
Yeah.
Another question here. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, no, you go ahead.
Okay. What if you feel your story is too similar to something you've taken? Okay, that's a similar question. Is there a point where it's just copying something else or your own story? That's similar to what we just answered.
I see one here that's how do you stay engaged with your novel, even through multiple drafts and shifting from an inspiration to your original take on it, which reminds me of what you were just saying, 75,000 words later, how do you stay with that story?
I mean, for me, hopefully, well, there's a couple different answers. One is that it's a little bit of a mythology. And I have these ideas too when I first started out that like, there's a certain way writing should always feel. And that's how I know it's going well. It's like, I'm engaged. I love it. I'm inspired. I'm like sitting there in my linen clothes, drinking my tea. It's awesome. Whatever your fantasy is of being a writer. When in reality, like a lot of times it's just a grind. Like every writer I know who, great writers, inspiring writers, beautiful writers, they all reach a point with a draft where it's just a grind. And it's like, oh, you're just like dragging yourself through it. So I think to just start by addressing the mythology that like you're always going to feel engaged, and that's a sign that it's going well. I don't know. What do you think, Nina?
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree with that. And, I found some of my novels have been really arduous to write, and I haven't enjoyed the process very much. And they still end up being novels that people enjoy. And sometimes they're their favorites, of all of my books. And the ones that felt so incredible to write, might not speak to a reader as well. So I do think that there is some sort of way that we have to disconnect from the process maybe, or how it feels, and just trust like the craft of it. And I really like how you put all of that. And then the aspect of like shifting from an inspiration to the original work is a really interesting one for me, because I did with Watch Over Me, like in between drafts. Well, I read a bunch of ghost stories to try to figure out how people did it. And one that really captivated me was The Little Stranger by Sarah Waters. And in between drafts, I would read parts of that book over again. And just what I loved about it so much was the mood. And so that was kind of a way of staying close to one of the sources of inspiration, just returning to that, material, reminding myself why I wanted to write a ghost story in the first place. And then kind of continuing on with my own story, but just kind of, reconnecting to that initial spark.
Yeah. I like to immerse myself in things that feel like the mood of what I'm trying to make.
Yeah, me too.
Gosh, there's so many questions. We're just gonna like pick them out as we go. Okay, here's a good question. I think one of the hardest parts about taking inspiration from multiple places is combining it in a way that makes sense and doesn't feel disjointed. How do you combine inspiration in a way that's cohesive? I think a big part of that has to do with what we were talking about earlier, of letting go of aspects of inspiration that aren't working for the story. That, like you with your Frankenstein thing, you realize like this structure is not what this story needs or wants. And so you just had to let go of it. A big part of whatever the work is and whatever the inspiration is, like getting a little time away from your manuscript, I think. Just stepping away and then returning to it and going, oh, like I see now that this particular aspect of the narrative is not working for this story. And it's a lot of just letting go. And it's hard. It's sad sometimes to let go of an idea you had of what the book was going to be and just like work with what it is.
Yeah. I mean, and also there comes to be a time though, like when the manuscript just fully becomes its own thing, like you've written your own thing in it after you, like I imagine, after you realized that it was going to be from one character's point of view. And after I realized that the frame narrative structure was not going to fit, it then gains this like new beautiful life of its own. And then you get to, nurture and tend to that thing that it has become, and the rest of it does fall away. So, I think for me, a lot of it has to do with intuition. Like, you learn to feel what shape your novel wants to have and where it's going to go. And then all of that other stuff doesn't feel as important anymore.
Yeah. Yeah. I like this question for both of our types of writing that we like to do. How do you come up with extensive family backgrounds in your work, and how do you incorporate that into the present time of your books?
Yeah, that's such a big one. I mean, it can be challenging. I mean, right now, a book that I'm revising has so much family history to try to incorporate, and too much for the book. And I ended up having to take so much of it out. But I do know that learning all of those details of my characters' pasts and where they came from does help the book. Helps it in its complexity and helps me know who my characters are. It
often doesn't end up on the page, right? I mean, I know for Goodbye from Nowhere, I watched like a couple documentaries on the farm workers' civil rights movement in the 60s. I already knew a bunch of stuff about Jim Jones and People's Temple because it happened when I was growing up, and I knew this was a California family, and the aunts and uncles would be the age I am. So, and they lived in Santa Rosa, which was like right near where the People's Temple started. So I wrote this whole, well, in the original version of the book with the 9 voices, you knew like how the grandpa and the grandma met, what part of Mexico they came from before they got to the US, how the family became like a blended family with this family from Mexico and the family that had been in California. But none of it is on the page. Like it's underneath it somehow. So there is, I don't know, sometimes when I'm reading or critiquing a book and there's like some background, I might think like, do we need to know this for the story? I like when I was first starting writing, I remember someone in my writers group said, writing a novel as if the person reading it already knows the story and you're just reminding them of the good parts. So like you might have a character drop in some little family history thing and you don't just resist the temptation to explain everything. That's just my biggest tip, is like trust that readers are going to see little snippets and go like, oh, I know what this is referring to, something that happened in the past. It's not important for the story now. Trusting the reader is a big part of it. I want to go to more questions because I think we got the 5-minute
Yeah.
sign.
Okay. So here's this one's really good. When your plot point depends on an event that happens before the book begins, how do you deal with that and find your starting points?
This makes me think of Story of a Girl, which the inciting event happens 3 years before the book starts. And I was a new writer. I just slapped a prologue right on there. And now I always hear people say like, don't depend on prologues and don't do prologues. Like, I love prologues.
Yeah,
so I just put
wrong
like
with
a
prologue.
2.5 page prologue that just says exactly what happened. I was 13 when my dad caught me in the back seat, blah, blah, blah. That's like, it just lays it all out. And then now chapter 1, we can go. It's 3 years later. It's still affecting her life. Boom. What about you, Nina?
Yeah. I mean, first of all, that's like the beginning of Story of a Girl is amazing. So I'm so glad that you didn't hear that no prologue advice. Yeah, I mean, it's really interesting because my books do tend to really like hinge on something that has happened before the present narrative. And I just, I think about like, if you're thinking about the life of your character, the whole life of your character, and then you're telling a particular part of that character's life. And it's like, you have like a frame that you can move, or like a dial that you can move and figure out when the story is going to begin. Like, what is the moment that like this present story, like what is the closest to this precise moment where
Like
everything's
an
going to change.
entry point.
Yeah. Like
Yeah.
what exactly is it going to be? And one of the things that I find so fascinating is that it usually for me isn't like a very dramatic moment. And I always have these grand ideas of like starting a book with this incredible sweeping sentence that's going to, just be like the kind of first line that you remember. And I always end up with these pretty like mundane first lines that are just like getting the story started. And so I really think of the beginning as just like the work of the beginning is just to get it moving, like just to put us wherever your character is in this moment, and let's let the story then take off from there. And then the issue of how you deal with the past and that event really has to do with how your character is how your character processes that for themselves. So like if this is something your character is trying to not remember, then you probably won't remember it until later on when your character finally has to face it.
I think just to avoid us getting totally cut off, because I realize that you can't see the
I can't see it.
But thank you so much for coming to the thing. You can get all the books at Blue Bicycle Books. You can go to yallwrite.org/books. It's great talking to you, Nina. I always love talking to you about writing.
Likewise.
I look forward to when we can close that 15-mile gap and safely just hang out for these conversations. Everyone, enjoy the rest of your YALLWrite. I hope it's been great for you, and take care of yourselves and happy holidays.
Bye, everyone. Thank you, Sarah.